We're only born once. But what if we had another chance? Would we make different choices or fall back into the same patterns?
Rebirth. We're all at different stages of our intellectual, spiritual, and mental lives. Whether you see yourself as an observer, staring into an endless expanse of existence for inspiration, or maybe you're being reborn right now, rediscovering yourself in metamorphosis. Or even yet, you've already discovered this rebirth, and you're seeing the world through a new lens. Regardless, every juncture, every challenge, and opportunity is a chance to reflect, to redefine, and be reborn. And that is exactly what we invite you to do today with 4 very special speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TEDxCUHK 2021. I'm Sarag.
And I'm Abigail.
And we are your MCs for this session. TEDx is an independently organized TED event, and we are pleased to be back for our 6th iteration. We hope you're all doing well, staying safe, and enjoying the event presented to you online this year. Our theme this year is Rebirth, and welcome to our 2nd session, Recreate. In the first session, Resurrect, we had the chance to question traditional ideas, look at things from a new lens, and take a step back to view the bigger picture.
In this session, we're moving forward to growing new ideas. It's time to innovate, to create and inspire. And as you journey through your own personal rebirth, our speakers today have insights and ideas for you to help you recreate your world.
Our first speaker today is Alvin Chung. Alvin is a business administration graduate of CUHK and now the co-founder and CEO of Handy Rehab. Handy Rehab is a health tech startup bringing affordable robotics to the rehabilitation industry. With a great understanding of community healthcare needs through working with various NGOs, medical professionals, and community-based healthcare service providers, Alvin has advised various social startups in Hong Kong while serving as a pro bono associate on venture philanthropy and impact investment.
Alvin's startup is a manifestation of his belief that business is a force for social good, a force with the power to recreate the world around us. Today, he's here with us to share his journey of creating a business without connections or resources, and to introduce us to the startup mentality which made it possible. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alvin Chung.
Good afternoon. Every tech startup needs 3 types of people: the tech guy, the rich guy, and the guy who knows people. I'm not techie. I was a business major, and unfortunately, I'm not rich. So I think you can now guess which one I am. When I first started to work on this startup, I was 24. I graduated from university just 1 year ago. At that time, I knew nothing about the healthcare market. I didn't have any connection. The only knowledge I had on robotics are those I learned from movies. Fast forward to 4 years later, we're now a team of 15 with products in over 100 healthcare facilities in Hong Kong and overseas. Here's one of the most important lessons I learned over these years. Like every other startups, we started from our own experience, some desktop research, and came up with an idea of what kind of products that we want to start with. We wanted to help stroke patients to improve their quality of living. We wanted to build wearable robotic devices, exoskeleton products, Iron Man-like technology. Very cool, right? It was an exciting idea. So we went on doing more and more research, and then we started building. It was a lot of brainstorming, a lot of drawings, 3D printings, sourcing and testing of different motors, different parts. It was fun. That kept us busy for months. We boys do love our toys, right? And then one day, suddenly, I realized, wait, what if we were wrong? What if there's no market for the products one builds? What if no one wants to buy our product, right? We might go bankrupt and waste a lot of time. So I knew that we must start reaching out to verify our assumptions before investing too much time and money. Very quickly, we put together a prototype, I hit the pause, and then we went on knocking on doors of our potential customers. Very lucky enough, we met with a physiotherapist in the trade show, and then we managed to set up a meeting with his team. Despite our very, very rough products, it's not a product, it's a prototype. It's a chunk of metals strapped together, some lights and a switch on, batteries on, every cable's are everywhere. So we showed them what we had on hand, and then we tell them what we're trying to build. One of the physiotherapists had to go with our prototype. He put it on the robotic glove, and then we switch on. He tried to do a few things with the prototype that he had on hand. A few minutes later, he took it off. He was not impressed, not at all. It was too heavy. It was too clumsy. He told us that it was too many cables. It's scary. Patients wouldn't use it, and they wouldn't use it. And it was not easy to operate, after all. They didn't even ask us how much we wanted to sell our product for. Obviously, we couldn't close our first customer, but we know what was wrong. And we know how to improve it. We need more feedback. So I went on knocking on more doors, asking for more referrals, and setting up more product demos with different organizations and therapists. Knowing that we were far from making any sales at that point, I had no pressure, right? I could focus on listening. I went there, showed them what we had, and then I started listening to what they really want. Listening to what my customers really care about. I saw every one of those meetings, those opportunities for me to learn from my potential customers. And also, more importantly, make friends with them. I saw them as a chance for me to observe their working environments and understand what their needs are. From there, we improved our design. We did countless rounds of iterations, product demos, rounds and rounds of different meetings as well. I didn't know how to draw electronic circuits, but I can listen. I know how to listen to them. During those times, it was the customer feedbacks that I care most. I didn't even think of selling anything in those meetings. I was there to observe. The only thing that I wanted to know at that time is, how can I help? How can I help to make their lives easier? Until at some point, we started getting questions like, how much are you selling your product for? When can I get a unit of that? And I was like, oh, that wasn't even a product, but someone's wanting to buy it. So that was my aha moment. I know that we are onto something. So I know that we can move on to the next stage. Finally, we finally launched our first official model in November 2018 during a conference. I can still remember that day when we were showcasing our products to the public. There was a couple who were in their 60s, I believe. They came to our booth. The wife was in a wheelchair. Her husband pushed her over. She got a stroke not long ago. I helped her put on the robotic glove on her left hand. Her fingers started moving. She looked up to me, had a smile on her face. She turned around, and then she said to her husband, I want to buy one. That smile was something that I would never forget. It's the most beautiful smile I've ever seen. Our first order finally came in almost 13 months later. It was a painful year of waiting and pitching, but because of the customer feedback loop that we had before, we know that we were on the right track. By now, the actual product that we're selling is not 100% what we envisioned 4 years ago, but it is definitely something that our customers truly want. Until this day, I always tell my team and my engineers, it doesn't matter how perfect you think our work is. The only opinion that really matters is the one from the customers. looking back now, I realized that it was not only the customer feedback that I got from those encounters, those meetings with them. What mattered more is the relationship which I built with them over time. They saw that we are listening to their needs, and we're trying to do something to make their lives easier. We're there to help. So here's my one advice for those of you, if you ever want to start a business, start reaching out today. Schedule a meeting with a potential customer of yours next week, and then start making friends with them. Show them what you got on hand, whatever you have, be it your prototype, your idea, even your pencil sketch. Show them, talk to them, and get them start to talk to you. It is very, very unlikely that you can get them to open their wallet in the very first go, but I'm sure you will get real opinions that matters from there. Go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvin, for these experience insights on recreating the idea of business from being profit-oriented to being people-oriented. Creating a successful business means connecting with your customers and understanding how to best serve them with your products.
Our next speaker is our very own Professor Anthony So. Professor So has a PhD in computer science from Stanford University, and he is now the Associate Dean of Student Affairs in CUHK's Faculty of Engineering, where he is also an award-winning lecturer on systems engineering and engineering management. Professor So's research has also won him awards, including the CUHK Research Excellence Award. His research focuses on optimization theory and its application in various areas of science and engineering, including machine learning and statistics.
In this talk, Professor So poses the question, how intelligent is artificial intelligence? AI technology is rapidly evolving, and within our lifetimes, many critical decisions will be left to machines rather than humans to decide. How can we ensure that these machines make fair and unbiased choices, that they do not discriminate? When a robot does something wrong, do we blame it or the human who programmed it? In the coming decades, we can certainly make AI play a huge role in our daily lives. But should we? Professor So believes that this intersection between technology, ethics, and sociology provides humanity with an opportunity for betterment. So let us please welcome him for his talk titled, Can AI Systems Be Fair and Ethical?
Thank you. So let us begin with the following. So AI with human values. This has a question mark. So we don't know whether we can do it. It seems to be difficult. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it is not possible. In fact, with AI, people tend to think that everything is possible, right? They say that, well, AI is going to take over the world, right? It can do everything. Think about the Terminator series. But fictions aside, really, our lives have been transformed by AI technologies. Think about the facial recognition software on your phone, the voice recognition software. And if you go online, try this. Type in poem generator or music generator, and you will see that there are this software which can generate a poem for you, just asking you to input a picture, for example. And so there are many things very amazing that AI can do. However, it also has its spectacular failings. And so let me here share with you 2 episodes that have gained widespread attention. The first one occurred last summer in 2020, and that is related to the grading of A-level exams. As we all know, last year the pandemic was raging, and the A-level exams were canceled. So how do we assess students? This creates a huge headache for everyone. So in the UK, basically they did it this way. So they asked teachers to give the grades of the students based on their school performance, and then submitted it to the exam board. The exam board, of course, won't take the grades as is. They will do some adjustment using an algorithm. Wow, sounds very nice, right? Using an algorithm, it must be very scientific. And so they did this, and they tried to adjust the grades based on the performance of students from those schools. But then the outcome was a disaster. Students got systematically downgraded, and the grades they got were very different from the ones they got assigned from the teachers. And so what happened? So apparently, students from less advantaged schools were more likely to be downgraded than the more advantaged or the richer schools. And so this creates a big problem, of course. And once people found out, this created a great uproar. And afterwards, they decided to withdraw those grades and to redo it. So how did that happen? So essentially, what the algorithm did was looking at past data. Right? They look at how students from those schools performed in the past, and they extrapolate and project. And this should be how students in these schools do today. So that is one example. Another one goes back a little bit in 2018 with the tech company Amazon. Everyone knows Amazon, right? Big tech company. And they are hiring a lot of people. And at the peak of the days, there could be up to 20,000 applicants per day. And so if you are working in the HR department of that company, wouldn't it be great if you have an automatic resume parser to help you to throw away, for example, 95% of the resumes and then just focus on the 5%? Well, sounds like a good idea. And being a big tech company, of course, they can do it. They come up with a resume parser, automatic one. So basically reading the resumes and then decide. Well, after they run it for a while, they realize a serious problem. And that is, it's systematically biased against women. So what happened? Well, apparently, again, it is because of the data. They look at, so how do they train the algorithm to look through these resumes? Essentially, they look at the resumes of the successful applicants from the past 10 years. And tech was a very male-dominated field back then. It is less so now, but back then it was heavily dominated by male. And so the algorithm picked this up and decided that, so the successful applicants should be male. Okay? And so this, of course, created a serious problem, a discrimination issue at hand. So as we see, artificial intelligence, really, there could be some pressing issues that we need to address. In particular, how intelligent is artificial intelligence? Of course, it can do a lot of computations very fast, very quickly, but it seems to lack the critical thinking ability to evaluate the consequences of its actions. And that is more like a tech question, but there are also other issues that arise from those two episodes that I mentioned. As we all know, our societies have laws that prohibit discrimination. For example, in students' admission, you cannot discriminate against students' background. Right? In hiring, you cannot discriminate against gender or disabilities. So it is illegal to do so. But now what if a computer, an algorithm, did that? Who is liable? Right? That raises a very interesting legal and ethical issue. Now, so to understand a little bit how we can go about fixing this, let us take a brief look at how machine learning or artificial intelligence systems work in a high level. So think about how we learn as humans. Well, when we were a kid, we look at examples, right? We try to mimic, and then we try to draw conclusions from the patterns we observed, and that is how we learn. And in some sense, that is also how machines learn. So what are those examples? Well, they will come in the form of data. So more concretely, consider an image recognition software where I'm trying to recognize pandas. So my data will be a lot of pictures of pandas. right? Different pose, different places, different shapes, different sizes, and so on. And then the algorithm will try to pick up what are the features of a picture that contain a panda, right? For example, there's this black spot, white spot, right? Maybe bamboo behind it, maybe with this round ears, etc. And so what it is doing, the algorithm is doing, is trying to train a classifier, or more simply, a model that tells you, okay, if you give me this picture, then I will output, okay, this is a panda or not. So this is what the box with a gear denotes. And then so that is what comes out of it. Now, however, what the model that we train is about, we can't really explain. It is more like a black box. You give me an input, and then I will tell you, okay, so this is a panda or not. But we don't really understand the mechanism inside how it decides this is a panda or not. Okay? So in essence, the algorithm just pick up the features in the data. So the more often the feature appear, the more likely it got picked up by the algorithm. And so if you link this back to the 2 episodes that we introduced earlier, for the A-level episode, the algorithm is picking up the performance of students from different schools, and they observe, so the algorithm observe, that students from the richer schools tend to do better, right? And in the Amazon example, the algorithm picked up the fact that most of the employees back then were male. And so that is how they encode. And so you can see that the algorithm automatically encode this kind of socioeconomic bias or gender bias into the model. Interesting, right? So how do we fix it then, right? So maybe one natural thought is, can we tell the algorithm not to look at those aspects? For example, in the Amazon episode, let's tell the algorithm, you cannot look at the gender of the applicant. Wouldn't that solve the problem? Well, unfortunately, the problem is not so simple. Because even if you instruct the algorithm not to look at the gender, there may be other pieces of the same resume that reveal that information. For example, in the resume, that may say that person is coming from a women's school, right? Or maybe that person participated in the women's volleyball team. Then the algorithm may be able to pick up these little clues and then piece together a picture and then give a conclusion that, okay, this is a female applicant. So it seems like a challenging problem. So how do we go forward? So it seems like a tech problem, right? Because we are trying to fix an algorithm. And indeed, from the engineering side, there are attempts to fix this. And there is a very popular research area these days called interpretable machine learning. So simply put, it is just the research on how can we explain the black box, right? Can we develop models that are more explainable, more predictable? So given an input, I can explain why it produced that output. But that is just one piece of the puzzle. How about the other issues that we raise, which are more of a legal and ethical nature? Well, this is also being studied. But then the question is, how should we incorporate AI design principles into the design of AI systems? And so this is currently underway. There are many different thoughts. People are coming up with all sorts of things. But essentially, there are 5 principles that are pretty much common across all the parties. And they are the following. So we have already addressed one of them, which is transparency. That is related to whether you can explain the model. But of course, we also care about fairness and justice, right? Whether the system respects equality, diversity, and inclusion. There is this beneficence. Simply put, it is like the model of one big tech company, do no harm. And then you have this responsibility, need to be accountable and honest, the system, and also privacy. This is what we all care about with data privacy, how the system is protecting our data. So with these principles, various countries, regions, and institutions, they started establishing more specific guidelines for the things that they are concerned about. So let me give you some examples. Let's say the European Union, they have this GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which requires websites to let the users know what kind of data they are collecting and what are they using it for. In Germany, they have established guidelines for autonomous vehicles. So there are a whole list of principles that they want to follow. For example, one that is quite interesting is they say in a hazardous situation, the top priority should be human life, even if it means damage to animal life or property. And there are also other guidelines in other places, like in UK, there is a Center for Data Ethics and Innovation. Here in Hong Kong, we have an ethical accountability framework. So with all this, how should we go forward, right? So to wrap up, let us go back to the original question that we posed. AI with human values. Is it even possible? Well, it is still a long shot, but we need to start somewhere, correct? And here, it really requires a dialogue between the technical people, the people from engineering, science, but also from people from disciplines outside of STEM, right? So because some pressing questions include how should we standardize the AI ethics principles. I mentioned 5, but naturally, you can think about many more, right? And once you come up with these principles, how do you incorporate it in the design of AI systems? And that is a technical question. And so this really needs a broader dialogue among all stakeholders. Actually, basically, that would be everyone because we are all using them. And rethink our approach to technology. And in some sense, this really fits into the theme of this series, Rebirth. This endeavor will result in a rebirth of AI systems. So to all of you, whether you are in the tech field or not, really try to understand more about the current AI technologies, their strengths and limitations. Of course, technologies can do many things, but I will leave you with this question. Should we do it? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor So. Whether we like to think about it or not, AI really is creating the world around us. And Professor So gave us a more comprehensive understanding of how that recreation is happening and gave us principles to guide us through the intersection between technology and our society. Thank you.
Our next speaker graduated with a bachelor's and master's degree in natural sciences from the University of Cambridge and obtained his PhD in physics from the Dutch National Institute for Subatomic Physics. He then spent 2 years at the California Institute of Technology as a Rubicon postdoctoral fellow before joining us here at CUHK's Department of Physics. Dr. Johnny Lee's research specializes in the physics of gravity and has left an impressive track record of awards such as the Gilbert Prize in Cosmology and the Special Breakthrough Prize as part of the LIGO team for the Nobel Prize-winning discovery of gravitational waves.
Dr. Lee has something special prepared for us today. It's quite rare nowadays that one of us gets to witness a birth, and it's rare still to witness the birth of something as mystical and yet as majestic as a black hole. But today, Dr. Lee has prepared for us an audio-visual tour through stellar explosions and the birth and rebirth of black holes. Please welcome Dr. Johnny Lee.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for being here with us. And thank you very much for the MCs for such a wonderful introduction. So our journey today starts here. Okay? This is the Nobel Prize of 2020 that was awarded for the discovery and for understanding of the black holes. So what are black holes? So half of the Nobel Prize was given to the understanding of black holes. And gravity, you can understand that as curvature of space-time. Here you can see the Earth curving space-time around it. And when you have another mass, let's say the Moon, it naturally follows the curvature that the Earth produces. And that's what we call gravity. But now imagine we take a lot of mass and we condense it into a single point. What happens then? It pretty much punctures space-time. And that's what we understand to be a black hole. Now, the other half of the equation, the other half of the Nobel Prize, was given for the actual discovery for the black hole at the center of our galaxy. So here we can see actually how this discovery was done. Here you can see, over time, we're tracing stars right at the center of our Milky Way. And we can see all the objects moving around something very massive. But there's no light coming from that area. And if we think about it, if we calculate how much mass should have been there, then we arrive at this astonishing number of 1,000,000 times heavier than our own sun. Yet it doesn't emit light. And that's our first evidence for the existence of a black hole. Now, recently, you may have seen this picture in the news. This was the first picture taken of a black hole. Now, it may sound as strange, right? It's a black hole. How can you take a picture of a black hole? Well, we didn't, in fact, actually took a picture of the black hole, but instead, we actually took a picture of the shadow of a black hole. So here you can see an animation which shows this concept. You can see light rays going around and starting to bend from behind a black hole. And all the light that then is bended towards our way, we can see it. But of course, at the actual black hole, it's black. We can't see anything. And so that's how we end up arriving with an image like this, where you can see the ring and something black in the middle. So black holes are something that we have a fair confidence in its existence. And these are mystical things that we've kind of captured our imagination ever since Einstein theoretically came up with this concept that a black hole must exist. But how are they formed? How can we form a black hole that is more than 1,000,000 times heavier than our own sun? And what I want to do today is actually guide you through the process and show you some of our current understanding in terms of simulations, right? Just our understanding of what happens. But I'm going to do something extra as well. I'm going to also give you an audio tour of how this happens. And I'll explain how this works. Okay, now let's start at the very beginning, where we have dense dust everywhere in the universe. And through the process of gravity, it attracts more and attracts more. And you get a bigger and bigger cluster of dust. And at some point, this creates so much pressure, right? And you add so much more mass to it that the star turns on and starts emitting light. And that's how we create a star. And the star then continues to burn up its fuel, right? Its hydrogen, its helium, and so on, until at some point it burns up all its fuel, it can no longer sustain itself, and it goes what we call supernova. It explodes. It sheds away its shell and then leaves behind something that is only a remnant, only a tiny fraction of its mass. Now, it can either, depending on the size, leave behind what we know to be a neutron star, which is just a big object, about 10 kilometers, but which has the mass of an entire sun condensed into it, which is almost like a single atom. Or, if the star is even heavier, it could even collapse into what we know a black hole. And the result of this process gives us a black hole that's about several times the mass of the sun. But again, we're still not there at the millions of times of the sun. Now, this process of a supernova has actually been observed. And this is actually an animation where you can kind of zoom in, you can pan in on one of the brightest events that happened in our night sky, which was a supernova in 1987. And what we can see nowadays, if we point our telescopes to it, is its remnant, what we call a nebula, right? So its mass that it shed in this big explosion is what we can actually observe now. And it actually makes for beautiful imagery. But still, okay, we want to go to the millions of solar masses. How do we get there? Now, to understand this process better, we actually need to turn to another Nobel Prize, which was given in 2017. And these three gentlemen got it for the discovery of gravitational waves. And let me explain to you what gravitational waves are. So gravitational waves are distortions in space-time that travel at the speed of light. And a distortion of space-time is actually just the changing of length. It's a compression of space-time. And you can see a vastly exaggerated image here, where you can see the Earth being completely distorted by a gravitational wave. Now, these actual distortions are very, very small, and they actually need to be picked up by kilometer-sized instruments that we've built. And this is an example in the US called LIGO, where there's a 4-kilometer machine that we need to pick up these tiny ripples in space-time. And the way this happens is that there's actually a laser being shot. Oops. There's a laser being shot at a mirror, and it bounces back, and then the whole system, is locked in. But when there's a gravitational wave compressing space, you can see a flickering of this laser, of the laser output. And that gives us, the image of a black hole. But better yet, I should actually call it sounds. These ripples actually cause the disturbance in the laser, which we can turn into sound. And that's something that I wanted to do today with you. So I don't only want to show you the process of what happens when we form black holes, but I also want to give you the audio sense of what it sounds like for black holes to be born. So this is the first example. I talked about a supernova producing neutron stars and black holes. Now, first what I'm going to show you is a simulation of how an explosion actually occurs. And you can kind of see this rumbling, this kind of, mess going on, and then at some point, it starts to wiggle, and then it will free itself. Now, let me play the sound, the gravitational wave associated with this. You can hear a vague rumbling. It's kind of gradual. It's almost like noise. Now, even in this process, we can actually look at the formation of what happens inside in that process, in the star. And so this is a different example where, in this case, I'm showing the creation of a compact object, phase transition. And you can kind of see suddenly there's this change, big change, and there's a shock wave being sent out. And then the rest of the star explodes. And again, let me show you what it sounds like in gravitational waves. So you could hear the same rumble that started in the beginning, but suddenly there's big poop, and then a fade off. And this is, for example, a way that we can figure out what was produced in this explosion. Was it a neutron star? Was it a black hole? Now, upon creation, we can still continue to listen to the sound. So first, what I'm going to show you is how does a neutron star sound? Right? Neutron stars have their own characteristic sounds. And so first, again, I'm going to show you the oscillation of a neutron star. And you can kind of see this neutron star rotating around, and you can see the mass being flown around. Now again, the sound of a neutron star. Okay, you can hear this continuous kind of pitch, but then it slowly fades over time. And a neutron star is stable, so you can hear this continuous sound. Now, what about a black hole? Black holes are very, very stiff. right? They're the most extreme objects that we have in the universe. How does that sound? So what you hear is a very faint blip. It's just a blip, bloop, and it's gone. It's pretty much, a single blip, and then because the black hole is so stiff, all the sound, all the gravitational waves is immediately damped. Okay, now to the central question again. We know how to create black holes that are several times the mass of the sun. And we've seen black holes that are a million times heavier than the sun. But how do we get from one place to the other? And that's actually what we call, a process where, we want to see if we can find so-called intermediate mass black holes. The black holes that are in between several times the mass of the sun and millions times heavier than the sun. Now, we don't necessarily know how this process happens, but we did get clues. Now, the first clue comes from the actual discovery, the first discovery of gravitational waves. And what we saw there was what we call a collision of black holes. Okay, so here you can indeed see two black holes orbiting each other. And this process emits gravitational waves so that the object gets closer and closer, radiates ever more gravitational waves until at some point it collides and forms a single black hole. Beautiful process. So this is actually an image that you would have seen if you were able to get close enough and see the background stars behind it. Now, black holes are too far away, and especially too far away for us to see a process like this happen. But it doesn't mean that we can't understand this process. And in fact, what I want to now show you was the first sound recorded from exactly this process, the collision of two black holes. Okay? Take a listen. So what you just heard was first time you heard it in normal speed, and if you got good ears, you would hear a faint blip. And the second time, we kind of increased the frequency so you can actually hear it, and you can hear this beautiful chirp. The amplitude and the frequency, right? The loudness and the pitch going up as the two objects get closer and collide to form a single black hole. So now we have a process where we take two lighter black holes and form a heavier black hole. Right? This is our first way into making ever more heavy black holes. Now, to highlight the process of how we understand how massive the black holes were, I'm going to play you now the same sound, but from two different collisions. One heavier and one lighter. And I want to show you how that sounds. Okay? So even, especially if you're musically trained and you're able to hear the difference in the pitches and also how the pitch evolved, how it ramps up, that's how we scientists can understand how heavy were the black holes and what end product did they make after their collision. Now, that by itself is great, right? We now have a firm grasp of how we can make out of lighter black holes somewhat heavier black holes. And our way towards an intermediate mass black hole actually came in 2019 when we saw a merger. Again, this is something that I just showed you before, right? There's just two black holes orbiting each other, colliding, forming a heavier black hole. Now, that by itself isn't very special anymore in 2019, but what was special is the mass that this collision had. And the mass, indeed, here was that fell into this intermediate mass black hole region. Now, to give you the sound, I want to play to you the sound. Now, what you heard again is just a faint blip. Right? It's a very short blip. I would always call it a bark rather than a chirp. And just because of that shortness and that burst of energy, that burst of sound, we can infer that this black hole was actually something that was in this so-called intermediate mass black hole region. Here we can see all the black holes that LIGO has found over the years, and you can see highlighted the one that I just talked about, the one that pushed us over this region where we're no longer talking about stellar mass black holes, but now we're talking about intermediate mass black holes. So indeed, we're actually going towards finding ever heavier black holes and on our way to discover how we can go from light black holes that come from the process of supernovae all the way to seeing black holes that are of the size or the mass that we found in the center of our galaxy. So indeed, right, we now are with these modern tools, with these modern scientific tools, we're now getting towards mapping out the process of the birth and rebirth of black holes that have such a fundamental importance in our whole evolution and everything we see around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for an incredibly insightful talk on the inspiring life of black holes. Your speech extends the concepts of birth and rebirth beyond the personal dimensions we normally confine it to, and helps illuminate the parallels which exist between the deeply personal and the immensely cosmological.
Our last speaker today calls us to dream and to believe in our own ability to recreate the world around us. Karishma Samthani's journey through domestic violence and marginalization in the ethnic minority community of Hong Kong have been a hope and inspiration to others who find themselves in similar situations. Karishma is now a successful talent management executive at a leading financial firm, but she has never lost contact with the communities she grew up with. In fact, her long-standing work to uplift communities in need has earned her name a place not only in many hearts, but also on the Diversity List 2019 of Youth to Watch.
For TEDxCUHK, Karishma will explain the power of resilience, persistence, and acceptance to fuel the flame within and light a path that has been ignored for far too long. The coming together of humanity for the greater good, regardless of the judgments, trials, and tribulations one may face because of their ethnic background. So please let us welcome Ms. Karishma Samthani.
When life throws you curveballs, swing for a home run. Have you ever doubted yourself? Have you ever felt surrounded and engulfed with darkness and negativity? Have you ever felt that there was something, just one thing, that you wanted to achieve and you couldn't? Here is my story from darkness to light. My journey to becoming my own lighthouse. I was raised by a single parent and lived through domestic violence for the most part of my childhood. We were considered poor, of zero status, not only by our family and friends, but also our community. My first set of curveballs were rough, and I had no bat to help me swing, let alone the confidence to swing a home run. I was always blindsided. Where was the light in my life? What was light? Where could it be found? I was always lost in the darkness of times. I didn't understand myself, nor did I understand my surroundings. I was drowning. During my school days, I saw a tad bit of glimmer of light. It was neighboring my sense of being. Surprisingly, it was through my mother's strength and courage. With sheer guts and determination, my mother battled and eventually succeeded in getting me an admission into one of the top EMI secondary schools in Hong Kong. Yet, as bright as the light of courage my mother was blessed with, I couldn't own it myself. It was there to guide me. It was there to light my path, but it wasn't mine. I was so unsettled that I dug my own canyon of failures and dragged myself 2 steps backward. To add salt to my wound, a teacher told my mom, "Your daughter, Karishma, has no future. She's been in the school for 3 years, and all she's done is failed. You've got 2 choices. She either repeats the year, or you take her out of the school and put her somewhere else, because there is no future for her." By then, I didn't even know if I had hit rock bottom, wallowing in the darkest depths of my ocean, or whether I was simply stuck, resisting the currents that would break me. And that was my big turning point. So how did I then begin building the foundation of this lighthouse? I took a deep breath, and I looked inside of myself, and all I saw was the agonizing pain and expression on my mother's face. And I just knew I couldn't add to that misery. I needed to do something. My mom was and is my rock. And I just couldn't bear to see her in pain and misery anymore. My turnaround didn't happen overnight. I had to constantly muster up every molecule of energy just to be able to fight the demons within. And fight I did. Brick by brick, I added, and I built my foundation of my own lighthouse. One of the simple tools I used was reflection and journaling. I also read avidly. I read books that would motivate me and help me dare to dream. I must give gratitude to those wise thinkers who helped me, wise thinkers like my spiritual guides, for bringing me along on this journey of inspiration and hope. People see me today as this glorious, hardworking woman with a top-notch job in an investment bank. Lots of awards, media coverage, glitz and glam. What they don't see is that fearful child who survived through all those trials and tribulations and persevered through the sleepless nights and tear-stained pillows. To move from brokenness to wholeness, I realized I had to face my challenges and embrace opportunities. So I made myself available to opportunities. Opportunities like this. It is these small steps like tiny particles of a wave that made me shine and be my own lighthouse through the storms of my life. Kristen Rogers said it so beautifully. I've died 1,000 deaths, each time reinventing myself brighter, stronger, and purer than before. From the midst of destruction, I became the creator of my life. From the midst of darkness, I became my own source of light. Remember I said, as bright as the light of courage my mother was blessed with, I couldn't own it for myself. As much as I received all this external love and comfort, there was still a lot of darkness and a lot of negativity surrounding me. And believe me, this is not a place you want to anchor in. There is a part in each one of us that is looking for the real you. And until you don't find that path and that authentic self, no matter how many lighthouses are shining around you, you will always find yourself lost in the darkness. I am grateful to have come across kintsugi, the Japanese art that really inspired me to understand how to rebuild myself. Let me explain what kintsugi art is. Kintsugi art is the process that puts broken pieces of pottery back together with gold, embracing flaws and imperfections, creating an even stronger and beautiful piece than before. Similarly, when I found myself breaking into pieces, I would anchor in that lighthouse that I built for myself. I would mend old and fresh wounds with my inner gold dust, which is self-care and love. It is my self-belief and courage that finally helped me get through the darkest moments of my life and find my lighthouse. Acknowledging this lighthouse within, I started engaging in community service. The projects I take up have made a great impact on the person I have become today. I identify with young adults who are clueless of what the future lies ahead of them. My experiences and empathy are the greatest tools I can share to uplift and help young adults. Through service, I not only share my experiences of rebirth, but also the process of building one's own lighthouse. To motivate and inspire, particularly the youth who experience life challenges. Henry George says, "Let no man imagine that he has no influence, whoever he may be and wherever he may be. The man who thinks becomes a light and a power." So with that, I leave you all with one thing. Dare to dream against all odds. I once dared to dream that I would stand on a TEDx stage, and look where I am today. Wake up each day with an outlook that can take you from one step to the next, creating your authentic self, and become that lighthouse for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Karishma. Your inspiring story reminds us that remaining voiceless is not an option anymore and guides us from rejection to the process of recreation. We must believe in ourselves and pave our own path to our futures, to create a future, to create the dreams that we all must dare to dream.
Finally, in continuation with TED tradition, we will now play for you an official TED Talk to end today's session. This talk was delivered by Elizabeth Gilbert, author of Eat, Pray, Love, in TED 2009, which was held in Long Beach, California.
In this talk, Elizabeth questions what it means to be creative, and she presents us with the possibility of creating in a way that doesn't draw us from ourselves, but rather draws from the creativity around us. Her talk is especially relevant to us as we explore what recreation means and how we can do it. I hope you all enjoy Elizabeth Gilbert's talk as much as I do. This is her talk, Your Elusive Creative Genius.
So, I am a writer. Writing books is my profession, but it's more than that, of course. It is also my great lifelong love and fascination. And I don't expect that that's ever going to change. But that said, something kind of peculiar has happened recently in my life and in my career, which has caused me to have to sort of recalibrate my whole relationship with this work. And the peculiar thing is that I recently wrote this book, this memoir called Eat, Pray, Love, which decidedly, unlike any of my previous books, went out in the world for some reason and became this big mega sensation, international bestseller thing, the result of which is that everywhere I go now, people treat me like I'm doomed. Seriously, doomed. Like, they come up to me now like all worried and they say, aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid you're never going to be able to top that? Aren't you afraid you're going to keep writing for your whole life and you're never again going to create a book that anybody in the world cares about at all, ever again? So that's reassuring, you know. But it would be worse, except for that I happen to remember that over 20 years ago, when I first started telling people when I was a teenager that I wanted to be a writer, I was met with this same kind of sort of fear-based reaction, and people would say, aren't you afraid you're never going to have any success? Aren't you afraid the humiliation of rejection will kill you? Aren't you afraid that you're going to work your whole life at this craft and nothing's ever going to come of it and you're going to die on a scrap heap of broken dreams with your mouth filled with bitter ash of failure? Like that, you know? And the answer, short answer to all those questions is yes. Yes, I'm afraid of all those things. And I always have been, and I'm afraid of many, many more things besides that, you know, people can't even guess at, like seaweed and other things that are scary. But when it comes to writing, the thing that I've been sort of thinking about lately and wondering about lately is why, you know? Is it rational? Is it logical that anybody should be expected to be afraid of the work that they feel they were put on this earth to do, you know? And what is it specifically about creative ventures that seems to make us really nervous about each other's mental health in a way that other careers kind of don't do, you know? Like my dad, for example, was a chemical engineer, and I don't recall once in his 40 years of chemical engineering anybody asking him if he was afraid to be a chemical engineer, you know? It just didn't come, like, got chemical engineering block, John, you know? How's it going? And it just didn't come up like that, you know? But to be fair, right, chemical engineers as a group, you know, haven't really earned a reputation over the centuries for being alcoholic manic depressives. And we writers, you know, we kind of do have that reputation. And not just writers, but creative people across all genres, it seems, have this reputation for being enormously mentally unstable. And, you know, all you have to do is look at the very grim death count in the 20th century alone of really magnificent creative minds who died young and often at their own hands, you know. And even the ones who didn't literally commit suicide seem to be really undone by their gifts, you know. Norman Mailer, just before he died, last interview, he said, "Every one of my books has killed me a little more." an extraordinary statement to make about your life's work, you know, but we don't even blink when we hear somebody say this because we've heard that kind of stuff for so long, and somehow we've completely internalized and accepted collectively this notion that creativity and suffering are somehow inherently linked, and that artistry, in the end, will always ultimately lead to anguish. And the question that I want to ask everybody here today is, are you guys all cool with that idea? Like, are you comfortable with that? Because you look at it even from an inch away, and you know, I'm not at all comfortable with that assumption. I think it's odious, and I also think it's dangerous, and I don't want to see it perpetuated into the next century. I think better if we encourage, you know, our great creative minds to live, you know, and I definitely know that in my case, in my situation, it would be very dangerous for me to start sort of leaking down that dark path of assumption, you know, particularly given the circumstance that I'm in right now in my career, which is, you know, like, check it out, I'm pretty young, I'm only about 40 years old, I still have maybe another 4 decades of work left in me, and it's exceedingly likely that anything I write from this point forward is going to be judged by the world as the work that came after the freakish success of my last book, right? I should just put it bluntly, because we're all sort of friends here now, it's exceedingly likely that my greatest success is behind me. You know, so Jesus, what a thought, you know? Like, that's the kind of thought that could lead a person to start drinking gin at 9 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, I don't want to go there. You know, I would prefer to keep doing this work that I love. And so the question becomes how, you know? And so it seems to me, upon a lot of reflection, that the way that I have to work now in order to continue writing is that I have to create some sort of protective psychological construct, right? I have to sort of find some way to have a safe distance, you know, between me as I am writing and my very natural anxiety about what the reaction to that writing is going to be from now on. And as I've been looking over the last year for like models for how to do that, I've been sort of looking across time, and I've been trying to find like other societies to see if they might have had better and saner ideas than we have about how to help creative people sort of manage the inherent emotional risks of creativity. And that search has led me to ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So stay with me, because it does circle around back. But ancient Greece and ancient Rome, people did not happen to believe that creativity came from human beings back then, okay? People believed that creativity was this divine attendant spirit that came to human beings from some distant and unknowable source for distant and unknowable reasons. The Greeks famously called these divine attendant spirits of creativity daemons. Socrates famously believed that he had a daemon who spoke wisdom to him from afar. The Romans had the same idea, but they called that sort of disembodied creative spirit a genius, which is great, because the Romans did not actually think that a genius was a particularly clever individual. They believed that a genius was this sort of magical divine entity who was believed to literally live in the walls of an artist's studio, kind of like Dobby, the house elf, and who would come out and sort of invisibly assist the artist with their work and would shape the outcome of that work. So brilliant, there it is, right there, that distance that I'm talking about, that psychological construct to protect you from the results of your work, you know? And everyone knew that this is how it functioned, right? So the ancient artist was protected from certain things like, for example, too much narcissism, right? If your work was brilliant, couldn't take all the credit for it. Everybody knew you had this like disembodied genius who had helped you. If your work bombed, not entirely your fault, you know? Everyone knew your genius was kind of lame. And this is how people thought about creativity in the West for a really long time. And then the Renaissance came and everything changed, and we had this big idea, and the big idea was, let's put the individual human being at the center of the universe, right? Above all gods and mysteries, and there's no more room for like mystical creatures who take dictation from the divine. And it's the beginning of rational humanism, and people started to believe that creativity came completely from the self of the individual. And for the first time in history, you start to hear people referring to this or that artist as being a genius rather than having a genius. And I gotta tell you, I think that was a huge error. I think that allowing somebody, like one mere person, to believe that he or she is like the vessel, like the font and the essence and the source of all divine, creative, unknowable, eternal mystery is just like a smidge too much responsibility to put on one fragile human psyche. It's like asking somebody to swallow the sun. It just completely warps and distorts egos, and it creates all these unmanageable expectations about performance. And I think the pressure of that has been killing off our artists for the last 500 years. And if this is true, and I think it is true, the question becomes, what now? Can we do this differently? Maybe go back to some more ancient understanding about the relationship between humans and the creative mystery. Maybe not, maybe we can't just erase 500 years of rational humanistic thought in one 18-minute speech. And there's probably people in this audience who would raise really legitimate scientific suspicions about the notion of basically fairies who follow people around rubbing fairy juice on their projects and stuff. I'm not probably going to bring you all along with me on this. But the question that I kind of want to pose is, why not? Why not think about it this way? Because it makes as much sense as anything else I have ever heard in terms of explaining the utter maddening capriciousness of the creative process, a process which, as anybody who has ever tried to make something, which is to say, as basically everyone here knows, does not always behave rationally, and in fact can sometimes feel downright paranormal. I had this encounter recently where I met the extraordinary American poet Ruth Stone, who's now in her 90s, but she's been a poet her entire life, and she told me that when she was growing up in rural Virginia, she would be out working in the fields, and she said she would feel and hear a poem coming at her from over the landscape, and she said it was like a thunderous train of air, and it would come barreling down at her over the landscape, and when she felt it coming, because it would shake the earth under her feet, she knew that she had only one thing to do at that point, and that was to, in her words, run like hell. And she would run like hell to the house, and she'd be getting chased by this poem, and the whole deal was that she had to get to a piece of paper and a pencil fast enough so that when it thundered through her, she could collect it and grab it on the page. And other times, she wouldn't be fast enough, so she'd be running and running and running, and she wouldn't get to the house, and the poem would barrel through her, and she would miss it. And she said it would continue on across the landscape, looking, as she put it, for another poet. And then there were these times, this is the piece I never forgot. She said that there were moments when she would almost miss it, right? So she's running into the house and she's looking for the paper, and the poem passes through her, and she grabs a pencil just as it's going through her, and then she said it was she would reach out with her other hand and she would catch it. She would catch the poem by its tail, and she would pull it backwards into her body as she was transcribing on the page. And in these instances, the poem would come up on the page perfect and intact, but backwards from the last word to the first. So when I heard that, I was like, that's uncanny. That's exactly what my creative process is like. It's not at all what my creative process, I'm not the pipeline, I'm a mule, and the way that I have to work is that I have to get up at the same time every day and sweat and labor and barrel through it really awkwardly. But even I, in my mulishness, even I have brushed up against that thing, at times. And I would imagine that a lot of you have too. Even I have had work or ideas come through me from a source that I honestly cannot identify. And what is that thing? And how are we to relate to it in a way that will not make us lose our minds, but in fact might actually keep us sane? And for me, the best contemporary example that I have of how to do that is the musician Tom Waits, who I got to interview several years ago on a magazine assignment. And we were talking about this. And Tom, for most of his life, he was pretty much the embodiment of the tormented contemporary modern artist, trying to control and manage and dominate these sort of uncontrollable creative impulses, that were totally internalized. But then he got older and he got calmer. And one day he was driving down the freeway in Los Angeles, he told me, and this is when it all changed for him. And he's speeding along, and all of a sudden he hears this little fragment of melody, that comes into his head, as inspiration often comes elusive and tantalizing, and he wants it, it's gorgeous, and he longs for it, but he has no way to get it. He doesn't have a piece of paper, he doesn't have a pencil, he doesn't have a tape recorder. So he starts to feel all that old anxiety start to rise in him, like, I'm gonna lose this thing, and then I'm gonna be haunted by this song forever, and I'm not good enough, and I can't do it. And instead of panicking, he just stopped that whole mental process, and he did something completely novel. He just looked up at the sky and he said, "Excuse me, can you not see that I'm driving? Do I look like I can write down a song right now? If you really want to exist, come back at a more opportune moment when I can take care of you. Otherwise, go bother somebody else today. Go bother Leonard Cohen, And his whole work process changed after that. Not the work. The work was still oftentimes as dark as ever, but the process and the heavy anxiety around it was released when he took the genius out of him where it was causing nothing but trouble, and released it kind of back where it came from, and realized that this didn't have to be this internalized, tormented thing. It could be this peculiar, wondrous, bizarre collaboration, kind of conversation between Tom and the strange external thing that was not quite Tom. So when I heard that story, it started to shift a little bit the way that I worked too, and it already saved me once, this idea. It saved me when I was in the middle of writing Eat, Pray, Love, and I fell into one of those sort of pits of despair that we all fall into when we're working on something and it's not coming, and you start to think this is going to be a disaster, this is going to be the worst book ever written, not just bad, but the worst book ever written. And I started to think I should just dump this project, But then I remembered Tom talking to the open air, and I tried it. So I just lifted my face up from the manuscript and I directed my comments to an empty corner of the room, and I said aloud, listen, you thing, you and I both know that if this book isn't brilliant, that is not entirely my fault, right? Because you can see that I am putting everything I have into this. I don't have any more than this. So if you want it to be better, then you got to show up and do your part of the deal, okay? But if you don't do that, you know what? The hell with it. I'm going to keep writing anyway because that's my job. And I would please like the record to reflect today that I showed up for my part of the job. Because, thank you. In the end, it's like this, okay? Centuries ago, in the deserts of North Africa, people used to gather for these moonlight dances of sacred dance and music that would go on for hours and hours until dawn. And they were always magnificent because the dancers were professionals and they were terrific, right? But every once in a while, very rarely, something would happen and one of these performers would actually become transcendent. And I know you know what I'm talking about because I know you've all seen at some point in your life a performance like this, And it was like time would stop and the dancer would sort of step through some kind of portal, and he wasn't doing anything different than he had ever done, 1,000 nights before, but everything would align, and all of a sudden he would no longer appear to be merely human. He would be like lit from within and lit from below, and all like lit up on fire with divinity. And when this happened back then, people knew it for what it was, they called it by its name. They would put their hands together and they would start to chant, Allah, 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 God, 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 that's God, Curious historical footnote, when the Moors invaded southern Spain, they took this custom with them, and the pronunciation changed over the centuries from Allah, Allah, Allah to Ole, 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 which you still hear in bullfights and in flamenco dances in Spain when a performer has done something impossible and magic. Allah, Ole, Ole, Allah, magnificent, bravo, incomprehensible, there it is, a glimpse of God. Which is great, because we need that. But the tricky bit comes the next morning, right, for the dancer himself, when he wakes up and discovers that it's Tuesday at 11 a.m. and he's no longer a glimpse of God. He's just an aging mortal with really bad knees, and maybe he's never going to ascend to that height again, and maybe nobody will ever chant God's name again as he spins, and what is he then to do with the rest of his life? This is hard. This is one of the most painful reconciliations to make in a creative life. But maybe it doesn't have to be quite so full of anguish if you never happened to believe in the first place that the most extraordinary aspects of your being came from you. But maybe if you just believed that they were on loan to you, from some unimaginable source for some exquisite portion of your life to be passed along when you're finished with somebody else. And you know, if we think about it this way, it starts to change everything. You know, this is how I've started to think, and this is certainly how I was thinking about it in the last few months, you know, as I've been working on the book that will soon be published as the dangerously, frighteningly over-anticipated follow-up to my freakish success. And what I have to sort of keep telling myself when I get really psyched out about that is don't be afraid, don't be daunted, just do your job. Continue to show up for your piece of it, whatever that might be. If your job is to dance, do your dance. If the divine, cockeyed genius assigned to your case decides to let some sort of wonderment be glimpsed for just one moment through your efforts, then ole. And if not, do your dance anyhow. And ole to you nonetheless. I believe this and I feel like we must teach it. Ole to you nonetheless, just for having the sheer human love and stubbornness to keep showing up. Thank you. Thank you.
Don't be afraid. Don't be daunted. Just do your job. With these words, Elizabeth Gilbert reassures us that the journey of growth, the journey to recreate yourself into the person you want to be, does not have to be scary. As the saying goes, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the second session of TEDxCUHK 2021. We would like to thank you all, our audience, for joining us today. Special thanks to our sponsors, NDN Group, the Office of Student Affairs here at CUHK, New Asia College, Animoca Brands, Outblaze, and CUHK Interport. If you would like to know more about how our sponsors are recreating your world, you can visit our website or see videos about their work on our Facebook and Instagram pages. Last but not least, we'd like to thank our TEDx team for making this event possible and extend our very warm thanks to each and every one of our speakers for coming here to share their ideas and insights with us as we all journey through rebirth and the recreation of the world around us. Ladies and gentlemen, TEDxCUHK. Thank you.